It's time to be liberated from business chaos. Hey, it's Scott Beebe with Business on Purpose. Got a special podcast episode that we're going to put up for you guys today. Typically, we do monologues, but every now and then we have the opportunity to have an interview with somebody that's just kind of a rare interview, and we have that today. Cameron Herold, the former COO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and a lifetime entrepreneur. You'll hear that story a little bit. Groomed to be an entrepreneur and continuing to live out his life as an entrepreneur, a coach of entrepreneurs, a speaker to entrepreneurs, all thing entrepreneurs. You're in it for a real treat. There's a couple of things as you get ready to listen to this episode. Get your notepads ready. We're going to talk in a couple of different areas. One, we're going to talk about franchising and the mindset of a franchise, even if you never anticipate to franchise. Really, really interesting stuff to take away. Second, we're going to talk about what C-suite or executive leadership looks like. Wait, before you jump, all of you business owners that have 2 or 12 or 25 employees and think, well, that's not us. We're not big enough. I think you'll be surprised to hear what he talks about. Thirdly, our beloved team meetings. Yep, we're going to have a conversation about that you won't want to miss because he wrote a great book called Meetings Suck. That is must read for any business owner. And then finally, we get into the world of public relations. How can you generate free press? Is that even possible? I think you'll hear some interesting stuff from Cameron Herold. You can check him out, Cameron Herold with an O, CameronHerold.com. One other thing, make sure to subscribe to this podcast, the My Business on Purpose podcast, also our My Business on Purpose YouTube page, and go check out my book, Let Your Business Burn. Stop putting out fires, discover purpose, and build a business that matters. Enjoy the interview with Cameron Herold. Hey, Cameron, from sunny Arizona and then out here near relatively sunny Hilton Head, South Carolina. Thank you for taking some time to hang out with me.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do it.
Yeah, excited. Done a lot of reading in your background. As I mentioned to you before, we liberate business owners from chaos. It's what we do all day long. But primarily, what we're doing is we're working with businesses between 2 and 25, and in some cases, 30 and 40 employees. And so there's this real desire to want to grow a business or to grow an asset. So something that they're not just in all day long in the weeds doing these things. So we're trying to get owners out of the mindset of feel like I have to throw Hail Marys all day. I'm constantly putting out fires. And you've got a lot of experience of maneuvering through that, both personally yourself and then also helping people maneuver through that. So we're going to get to a few different topics as we talk about that. Before we dive in, Cameron, just give us your background. Where'd you come from?
Yeah, I was groomed as an entrepreneur. Both of my sets of grandparents were CEOs and owned their own companies. And then my father was also an entrepreneur, and my parents raised the 3 kids to be entrepreneurs. So for the last kind of 15 to 25 years, the 3 of us have all run our own companies. I started running my first business when I was 21 years old. So 34 years ago, started off in my own company, had 12 employees when I was 21. I ran my business for a few years while I was in university. And then when I graduated from university, I actually started coaching entrepreneurs before coaching was even a thing. I was coaching entrepreneurs in 1989. So 1989, I coached 16 entrepreneurs, coached 21 the year after. And really, I'd coached 120 entrepreneurs by the time I was 29 years old, I think it was, including I coached Kimball Musk, who was Elon's brother, and I coached their cousin, Peter Reeve, who built Solar City. So I got involved in a franchising organization when I was 21 years old called College Pro Painters. So I had been in the franchising space, really built that business around the concept of coaching entrepreneurs and coaching leaders to build real companies very quickly. So I did that for 7 years, and then I was a partner in a chain of auto body collision repair shops. I led the franchise operations. It's called Boyd Auto Body in Canada, and it's now called Gerber Auto Collision in the US. It's now about a $900 million largest collision repair chain in the world. I left there and was hired as the president of a private currency company, a barter exchange. We built that company up, sold the group of barter companies that we owned to a US public company. I was on the leadership team of that for a couple of years, and then I left there and joined my best friend who was building his company called the Rubbish Boys. He was just changing the name over to 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and I joined him as his second in command. I came in as the 14th employee at 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and when I left 6.5 years later, we had 3,100 employees system-wide. We'd gone from 2 million to 106 million in 6 years with no debt, gave up no equity. ranked as the #2 company in Canada to work for, landed 5,200 stories about our company, including Oprah, et cetera, et cetera. Left there 4 years ago and started again entrepreneurs full time. Typically 50 to 500 employees is my zone. And I've now worked with clients in just over 20 countries. I've done paid speaking events in 26 countries on 6 continents. I've written 5 books. I started an organization 4 years ago called the COO Alliance that no entrepreneurs are allowed to join. It's only for the second in command. And then I also have a podcast called the Second in Command Podcast. And then lastly, I'm launching a course. So anybody who's listening right now, I'm launching a course right now called Invest in Your Leaders. And it's all of the soft skills, the leadership skills that all managers and leaders need to that really aren't taught day to day. So that's kind of me. A little bit.
That's helpful. All right. So there's a couple of things, Cameron, that you mentioned in there. I want to talk about the franchising stuff first. I want to get to that. And then after that, as I mentioned, I want to dive into the executive leadership. You did a great job of articulating second in command and explaining that entrepreneurs are actually not allowed into this community that you're building, but it's the second in commands. And then I take a little license. I want to talk about some team meeting stuff as well, and then some public relations things. So let's go with the franchising first. And seeing your grooming and your background, something that stuck out to me from what you just said is that you were coaching entrepreneurs in your 20s, and then you pivoted to start talking about franchising. And in that, what I wrote down and what it sounded, what my ears heard was running a franchise is really not much different than running a coaching company. It's not necessarily the product that's being sold, it's the coaching being done.
Yeah, well, if you're a good franchisor, it's the same. Most franchisors don't care about their franchisees enough. The model that I grew up in at College Pro Painters, it was all about the franchisee being successful, and the more successful they were going to be, the more that we were successful as a franchisor, because we had to sell 800 franchises every year. We had to go out and sign 800 new franchisees, train them, get them up to speed, coach them, help them hire 8,000 painters in 6 weeks. And then we'd paint $60 million in houses in 4 months. And then 8,800 kids would quit and go back to university, and we would do it again. So we became operating world class at the recruiting, interviewing, selection, training, and onboarding of franchisees. And that's really where I learned about coaching entrepreneurs. Franchisees are entrepreneurs, right? They're quitting their job, they're putting down some money, they're starting something up on their own, following a format and a system, but there's lots of formats and systems for any business owner as well. So it's very, very similar to coaching.
Okay. Dive in a little bit when it comes to franchising a business. I want to stay away from the broad question of, hey, what's the most successful strategy for franchising business? But instead, I want to move into, you mentioned reviewing, interviewing, onboarding, training. How did you build that? What did that look like?
Well, we were really focused on making sure the franchisee was profitable. So if we could hire and onboard or award franchises to franchisees that already had the skills that we were looking for. So they had to be strong in leadership, strong in attainment, goal orientation, strong in tenacity. They had to have the right basic, instrumental skills to run a business, and then they had to be able to control their emotions. And as long as they could do those 5 things, we could make them successful by giving them the system. So we just really focused on bringing those right people into the mix, and then giving them the system and really focusing them on it.
Okay, good. I want to dive into the leadership, tenacity, controlling emotions. And again, Cameron Herold, if you go to CameronHerold.com, you can check out a lot of what he's going on right now. Cameron, when you talk about leadership, tenacity, controlling emotions, those 5 elements that you had mentioned, how do you test for those?
Well, we had a definition for each of the 5 that every single person in the company knew. So as an example, tenacity was the dog-like work ethic to get over, under, or around any obstacle put in one's path. I mean, that's a definition that I learned 32 years ago that I can still recite word for word. We also then knew what questions we would ask to find out how tenacious someone was. And then we rated them on a bell curve where 40% of the candidates would be given a 3 out of 5. 20% of the candidates would be given a 2, and 20% could be given a 4 out of 5. 10% could be given a 1, and 10% could be given a 5 out of 5. So we knew what we were looking for. We knew how to find it, and we knew how to rate them. And then over the course of two interviews and going through the resume and doing reference checks, we could rate people pretty successfully because we knew what we were looking for. So that was the simple system. We used the exact same system at 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And, even in my Invest in My Leaders course, I even outlined, probably a lot more, well, certainly a lot more detail, how any company can take that simple system and bring it into the business. Most companies screw things up because they've never trained their managers on how to do a job interview. And every manager does job interviews. Like, business isn't difficult. We just overcomplicate it.
So you guys have you've metriced these words that you've put definitions for.
Yeah, we metriced it, but we also obsessed about training people on the skills to do recruiting and interviewing and hiring, right? We train, like, I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of hours on reviewing resumes and setting up an interview and doing a first interview, doing a second interview, reversing the sell, doing reference checks. Like, I've had dozens of hours of training at that, and most entrepreneurs have had none. So most entrepreneurs think business is difficult, but they're doing it because they've had no training or coaching on the base skills they need to actually be successful.
I think it's interesting too that you're focusing so much of this on the period of time that somebody is not even on board yet. They're not a franchisee. They're not an employee. This is all happening before. Cameron, I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, but let me voice the frustration of so many, or the silliness of so many people when they say, Cameron, come on, reference checks. I mean, all they're doing is giving us the name of homers that we're going to call, and they're just going to tell us, what we want to hear. Respond to that.
I don't call the names they give me. What I do is, when I'm reviewing the resume, I look for the names of people they will probably know. Who managed them, who did they manage, who was on their leadership team or their management team with them, who did they struggle with at in that job, who did they turn to for advice and problem solving in that job. And over the course of 2 interviews, I'll draw out names of up to 10 people. And then at the end of the second interview, I'm going to turn to them and say, okay, over the first 2 interviews, you gave me the names of 10 people. Here's their names. By Monday, I need you to come back to me with the email addresses and phone numbers for at least 8 of those 10 individuals. Most of the people will say, well, I already gave you my references. I go, yeah, but I'm not calling those people. I want to call these people. The C players will run away and hide. You'll never hear from them. The B players will give you exactly 8 out of 10. The A players will somehow track down the emails and phone numbers for all 10 people for you. And then you simply say to them, look, if I called Fred and I asked Fred about your skills in this area, what would Fred say? If I called Fred and asked him when you couldn't control your emotions, what would he say? So I have a series of questions under the threat of reference check or torque that I ask them. And that's when you really, really learn a lot about the candidates.
Okay. Cameron, as you're thinking through this idea of franchising, and it's so fascinating now to hear you talk about franchising, I feel my mind isolating towards find the right people, find the right people, find the right people. And obviously there's the system side of the franchise that goes along with it. You've got to build great systems, but one of those great systems has to be the upfront nature. Can you walk?
I think it's all about the finding of people, because the reality is, if you have the right people, they'll follow the most basic of system that you give them. And if there isn't I call this interdependence. If there's no system, they'll figure one out for themselves. But they won't blame you because they can control their emotions. They'll figure it out. They'll blame themselves. They'll dig deeper. They'll get tenacious. It's all about the right people. And then at the organization, if you obsess about your franchisees' happiness, you obsess about your franchisees' profitability, they'll go through brick walls, and all of a sudden your royalties increase and your revenues increase, and they validate well, which means you sell lots of franchises because they're really, really happy. Again, it's super simple, but when most franchisors obsess about getting the right system and brand and marketing, they're missing the point. It's all about the franchisee being happy and profitable.
Okay. So when a franchise is being set up, where does the investment need to go versus where the investment normally goes?
Well, for most franchisors, I think they franchise too early, and they're franchising because they don't make enough money at their core business. So now they're going to franchise it, which means they're doomed to fail right from the get-go. Yeah. So most franchisors should actually figure out how to make a really good amount of money off one location to prototype that location, and they could be able to make $300,000-$400,000 a year off that location. If you can't, you really have no business franchising, in my mind.
Yeah.
Or you need to be able to prove that you can then run 5 locations and make really good money off them. But again, if you can't figure out the format to make a lot of money at it, you shouldn't franchise. So I think the initial money should go into figuring that out. And then the second part is building that kind of culture around, the success. And as you mentioned, the coaching side, if you really bring in the right people and coach them, you grow them. You can't coach the wrong people, right? You need to coach the right people.
Very helpful. All right. That makes a lot of sense. And then from a franchising standpoint, I also wanted to ask this too, Cameron, what in that world of franchise, I mean, the metrics that you guys have laid out is just extraordinary. And what you've been able to do in those first couple of decades of your life, in your 20s and then in your 30s to help build 1-800-GOT-JUNK. When you look back, there's got to be a moment or two that you're just like, man, we screwed that up. What are one or two of those things?
Well, we almost lost the company. We were about 100 million in system-wide sales, 330 franchises, and we were running out of cash. And what happened was we didn't understand how to run a business with a balance sheet and a P&L that was that big. And we were running it like we were a small company. When you're a small company, if you lose a little bit of money, you go and borrow some, you max out your credit card, you take some money out of your bank. But cash is like oxygen, and the bigger you get, the faster you can run out. It's like going down scuba diving, the oxygen gets more compressed. So we ran out of cash because we spent $2 million on an office renovation and a move, $600,000 on bonuses, $800,000 on taxes. And we were down to like 300 grand in cash. We'd spent 5 million over the course of about eight or 10 weeks. So we went to the bank to borrow some money, and the bank said, well, we can't loan to you. And we said, why? We've been profitable for 6 years, number 2 to work for. Look at our growth, super successful. And they, yeah, but you don't have any cash. And we're like, yeah, because we just spent it all on this stuff. So we just didn't know. The problem was we weren't listening to our head of finance. Our head of finance was very quiet, very amiable, very analytical. And Brian, who is the CEO, and myself as COO were very dominant. I'm a 98D in disc. I'm a 4.393. I'm a high quick start. So we were steamrolling over top of this guy. And when he would say, I think you should be careful, we're like, no, we got it. Well, we didn't understand how to run $100 million company. We knew how to get there, but we didn't know how to get from 100 million to the billion. So the big lesson was, if you're going to hire people, listen to them. And if you're not willing to listen to them, then hire people you're willing to listen to. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, surround yourself with smart people, but give them a chance to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I was going to ask you how you burn so much cash, but that makes sense. Because theoretically the franchise is a smaller unit to be able to suit and court all of the franchisees, which is growing and growing and growing.
Well, we could easily run the company. I made sure that we could do this after our 3rd year. I could make sure that we could exist and easily grow off royalty revenue only. We never needed to sell another unit to make money. And that's the fail of most franchisors, is they need to sell franchises to exist. That's when you're failing. You need to be able to make enough money off the royalty revenue and with happy franchisees that you could still run the business. Because if you run out of locations, or B, as you start to sell out, you're kind of dead. And most franchisors do that. They sell masters and area development agreements. And so now they're sold out. Well, great. You've just lived off all that revenue. Now it's gone. And then they just collapse on themselves.
Yeah. Okay. We may come back to franchising a little bit. I want to pivot it into the C-suite world, into the number ones and the number twos and all of those things. Yeah. I'm curious. I'll run down the road of personality that you were talking about as well. It's clear that you're a driver just by your straightforward nature, also relatively unemotional nature. So it's easy to tell. And I'm not sure what Brian's, do you have any insight? Well, I'm sure you do. Brian's personality, what is that as relative to yours?
Exactly the same as mine. He's a 4.393, or so. He's a 6.393. So he asks a few more questions, but high quick start. He's a very, very high D, very high I in disc. He's a high culture, bipolar, ADD. We were like nitroglycerin. We were amazing. Yeah. We could blow it up to the 100, but he needed someone more stable, more analytical, more process, more, matrix decision making. To replace me. They brought in the former president of Starbucks US to replace me when I left. So Brian and I were amazing to get to that stage, but he's very, very entrepreneurial.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got two very dominant figures with a very passive, intellectual, compliant, but a very passive figure. When it comes to let's call it the business owner. So we'll go into that world to even where we might not have a C-suite title on a business owner at this stage in the size of their company. They may not consider themselves that. But what are some of these things that the entrepreneur needs to be mindful of as they're looking for that operational executive, that number two?
Well, yeah. So if you're looking for a number two, first off, if you don't have an executive assistant, you are one. So
Mm,
before you hire a number two, make sure you hire an EA, because you really want to get all the administrivia off your plate. You want to get all the $15, $20 tasks, all the tasks that burn you out or take up time that aren't necessarily in unique ability. And often those are things that you can get to an EA first. Once you have the EA, you're going to start looking for the jack of all trades, master of none. So you're going to look for people that are good at project management, good at time management, good leaders, good sales, so they can actually kind of drive the business forward and take stuff on. So we're kind of really calling that your, I guess your second in command. But if you're looking for a true COO or a true, VP of operations, you're looking for someone that you can trust implicitly on day one. So you have to really interview for trust to make sure that you could hand them your passwords and keys to your bank account day one. I had a CEO say to me one time that I was coaching, he said, it takes about 90 days after I've hired someone to know if they're the right fit. And I said, that's because you suck at interviewing.
mm,
But if you do the interviews properly, you know everything about them before they start, which means you don't need to wait until day one at all,
mm,
right?
mm,
So I think that's the key right now, is to make sure that you're hiring for proven skill set, strong culture fit, and really, really deep implicit trust in that in that person.
mhm. You did a good job earlier of sort of metricifying, not a word, but putting some metrics, putting some objectivity to some of those words and definitions that you have. How do you bring objectivity to trust? How do you begin to unearth that?
Well, with Torque, with those thread of reference check, right? You're really doing the reference checks to make sure that you know everything about those people. You don't wait to find out about them later. You figure out what are the core skills the person needs to be able to, work on in their day to day. What are the core projects that they're going to be overseeing? What are the behavioral traits you want them to be able to exhibit, and then interview against that.
Mhm, mhm. Okay.
This is the stuff
Um,
that I try to cover a lot of it in good detail in my Invest in Your Leaders course, and also in Double Double. I'm not trying to sell people on stuff,
no,
but
please do. I want you to share about it. Yeah.
yeah, I really go in, like, I can't walk you through how to really do a full interview, in 5 minutes, but it's really begin with that end in mind. What are you looking for? Can you find it? And then interviewing hard against it, and then learning how to interview. Again, most entrepreneurs, how much time have you been trained in interviewing?
Yeah, hardly any. And Cameron, we just hired another coach for us literally a week ago tomorrow. And our hiring process, we started at the beginning of November and we just completed it last
Mhm.
week. And we've got a 7-stage hiring process. People look at it and think I have lost my mind. In fact, the candidate, because the person we're looking for is an ID personality, so they're naturally active, forward leaning. Within 2 weeks, he was ready to start. And we just kept saying, hey, we've got to slow this down. We actually have it check boxed out. So we had to create this on our own. We've heard things from guys like you before. So we're able to part and piece it together a little bit. But even so, we've got this process in place, but you feel like a total fish out of water. And you kind of get mocked and laughed at by your friends because they're like, man, this is such overkill. But I feel like this is like the second thing close to marriage that you're sharing a lot of detail with people during the day.
Yeah, and again, like what you said, is you've got a strong process in place, but then who is involved in the process, and have we trained them on interviewing? Do they know how to do open questions, closed questions? Do they know how to reference? Do they know how to probe? Do they know how to actually rate people? Can they define what they're looking for? Do they know how to use a preg clause? Do they know how to build rapport without talking? Do they know how to reverse the sell? Like, all very, very strong skills that people need to be trained in, practice. We need to certify them in it, and they should be able to go do interviews. That's the stuff we worked hard on under Got Junk. I felt my role was to grow people. And I almost pictured, like, all of my leaders were walking and climbing up two ladders that were right beside each other. One ladder was skills, and they had one foot and one hand going up the skills ladder. And then right beside it was a confidence ladder, and they had one foot and one hand going up the confidence ladder. Well, if their confidence ladder was shaking, they couldn't go up the skills ladder at all. So I had to raise their confidence, raise skills, raise their confidence, raise their skills, raise their confidence, raise their skills, and then they could go up the ladders. So I just felt like my core role at 1-800-GOT-JUNK was always to grow people, which again is why I've written my books. It's why I coach CEOs. It's why I launched the Investing Your Leaders course. And I think really successful companies, it's why coaching is if it's done properly, is such a powerful thing, right? Because you're raising the confidence of your not your subordinate, but of the mentee, and you're also raising their skills.
Mm-hmm.
I think unfortunately what a lot of coaching does to the mentees is it harms their confidence, because a
Mm.
lot of the coaches, I'm trying to set my clients free. Like, I don't want to coach them after 18 months. I'd like them to be done and on their own. I'm trying to give them teach them how to fish, not give them a fish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, so Cameron, think back to when you guys were kind of in that healthily combustible growth stage where it was just go, go, go. To make the pivot to where you've got this mindset now of growing people, and you were groomed as an entrepreneur. Many people are not groomed as entrepreneurs. In fact, some are accidental entrepreneurs. They got fired from a job, something happened, they fell into this, and so now they're just trying to make it. But again, they're working day to day in their business. How does somebody go from what Michael Gerber might call a technician in the business to not just an entrepreneur? Because I don't think that we've defined that. Based on what I'm hearing from you, I don't think we define that word just right. Entrepreneurialism seems actually a little bit less about the Lone Ranger out west just shooting crap everywhere, and more about being very intentional on this idea of the interview process leading up. So get it right before you bring them on. How does somebody make a time pivot to go from I'm working in the business, I'm grinding away, I'm a technician, to okay, now I've got these people and I'm going to slowly let this thing go? How do they make that shift?
Well, first off, I think it's by remembering the reason we start a company. We only start a company for one of three reasons, or for all three. One, to give us more money. Two, to give us more free time to, control over our time. And three, to say that we did it, right? To make us feel like we're successful, because we didn't have that feeling in school or in life, and we want to put our stamp on something.
Mm.
That's it. So if you're going to run your own business, start setting yourself up and rig the rules in your favor, right? Like, change the rules so that you do that. But most entrepreneurs work harder, work longer. That's not why you started it in the first place. So many entrepreneurs keep putting their money back into the business, pouring into the business. Well, you got to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So you want to take some of your money out along the way, right? You need to really grow the business in a smart way. And so I think if you go into it with that mindset, you will start to add people, you will start to raise your prices, you will start to deliver, you'll start to remove yourself from the day to day, so that you have a business, not a job. I had an entrepreneur I was coaching one time, and he's like, God, I'm working constantly. I'm like 7 days a week. Who's making you work so hard? And he started laughing and realized like he had no one to blame but himself.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to set yourself up for that, right? There's no one to blame. If you're 10 years into running your business and you're still not making money, that's your fault. Like, you just haven't set up the business properly. Even my first week at 1-800-GOT-JUNK, I raised our prices by 40%. Because no one was making money. Brian wasn't making money. His call center employees weren't making money. No one in the trucks were making money. Franchisees weren't going to make money. We weren't charging enough. You can't make money. It's really tough to be the Walmart of anything. We wanted to be the FedEx of junk removal, or the Starbucks of junk removal. And so you have to charge a premium, and then you can afford to deliver on that promise.
I heard, I don't know if you got this from somebody, but Seth Godin said one time, it never pays to be on the race to the bottom, because somebody always wins.
Exactly. Seth actually wrote the front cover testimonial for my first book, Double Double.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And I do want to make sure that we put in there Meeting Sucks, one of my favorite books. It's a great book that Cameron Herold wrote. We're on with him right now, Cameron Herold. If you go to CameronHerold.com, you can read a lot about Cameron, see his books on there as well. And there's one book about PR. We're going to get to some of that here in just a minute as well. But I do want to get to team meetings. I can't be on an interview with you and not talk about team meetings. You got a brilliant title of the book, Meetings Suck. It is a reference to what most people feel, and they feel that meetings suck. We have gotten to the point where we love our team meeting, and to the point that even if I'm not there, the team meeting goes on. We feel like we do a great job of getting that. But how do you pivot to that point, because it's epidemic at this point.
Well, yeah. So let's start with kind of defining what a meeting is. So a meeting is when two or more people meet in person, over the phone, or over video to discuss and move something forward. That's a meeting. So a phone call is a meeting, a Zoom call is a meeting, a daily huddle is a meeting, a financial review is a meeting. Your annual planning is a meeting. Now, the reason that most employees say meetings suck is they've never been trained on a meeting. They have no idea how to show up and attend and participate in meetings. So of course meetings suck. Most employees and most managers, like, again, have you had at least an hour's training in your life at running meetings? Other than reading my book, Meetings Suck, have you ever been trained in meetings?
No, that's it.
No.
That's
Right.
what helped us get to this point, was your book.
And you're not alone, right?
Yeah.
So I was coaching a company from 40 people up to 700 people over 6 years, and I was talking to the CEO, and I said the problem is that we have to train all of our managers and leaders how to run them. So a third of the book Meetings Suck is how to run meetings. A third is how to attend them and participate in them while you're there. And then the third is what meetings you need to run a highly successful company. So there's like the basic tenets of a meeting are easy. And when you run them, meetings are really amazing because you do need them to drive the business forward.
Mm-hmm. So give some of the hallmarks when you talk about a meeting that doesn't suck. What are some of those hallmarks? I love your definition: two more people meeting together to push something forward. And then within that meeting, what helps them push that thing forward?
Also, every meeting has to start on time, right? Every meeting should finish 5 ways you can show up on for your next meeting. Even when we were starting this podcast interview, I have a hard stop at 5 minutes before the hour. That's so I can go to the bathroom, get a cup of tea, sit down, and be ready for the next call that starts at the top of the hour. But I can't finish on time, and I'd be 10 seconds late if I always exactly on time.
Yeah.
So everything has to have a purpose. Just one sentence: why are we here? Every meeting can have a maximum of outcomes. The big three things cover. If you're trying to cover more than things, for the most part, you probably need a different group of people. So you should have a separate, even if it's a 10 or 20-minute meeting. Every meeting has to have an agenda. Just what are we covering? In what order are we covering it? And how many minutes are we going to spend on each agenda item? I always like booking my meetings for half the time I first think about booking them for. So if I'm going to be like, let's get together for an hour, let's book it for 30 minutes. We'll control all the idle chatter. We'll control all the side comments, and we'll get through and we'll stick to the agenda. And if we have other things we need to talk about, we'll put them on the parking lot. We'll talk about them at the end or offline. Those are some of the basics, right?
That's good. That's good. In the last few minutes, Cameron, let's pivot to the PR, the big sort of elephant in the room as it relates both to marketing. Public relations is different, but there is some camaraderie between those two. You wrote a great book called Free PR: How to Get Chased by the Press Without Hiring a PR Firm. If you go to CameronHerold.com, you can see it there. Cameron, talk about how did you? I think PR was a huge part of what you were doing at 1-800-GOT-JUNK. When did that come on your radar? And then what have you done about that to evolve this idea of public relations?
Yeah, a lot. So I was exposed to generating free publicity when I was quite young. My dad kept getting covered by the we grew up in a small town, 80,000 people, and my dad's business was always getting in the news. And I always didn't understand why my dad was getting covered, because he wasn't such a big deal. He's my dad. Like, I'm like, I knew he wasn't a big deal. He was my dad. So it demystified for me. And then when I was 21 years old, I was in my house painting business, and I saw an article in the newspaper that was running a landscaping company. And I remember thinking to myself, well, maybe they'll write about me. So I phoned one of the writers from the newspaper, and his name was in the newspaper. Like, every article in the newspaper has the writer's name, and every photo has the photographer's name. So I just phoned the Sudbury Star and I said, hi, is Tom Hewlett, that was the guy's name, is Tom Hewlett there? And they said yes, and they put me through. And I said, hey, Tom, it's Cameron Herold calling. I think I have a good story for you. Do you have minutes? And he said, what's your story? I went, well, I couldn't find a job this summer, so I started my own house painting business, and now I've got 12 university students working for me. And we're painting a job like 10 blocks away from your office. Do you want to come and talk? And he said, yeah, I could come over in like a couple hours. And I said, great. And I got off the phone. I'm like, well, that was simple. And he came over and he took a photo and wrote an article, and I was in the Sudbury Star that week. So then I thought I'd try to get on a TV show. And I called this woman at the TV station, and she's like, yeah, can you come in next week? And that was it. Like, I realized that I was doing them a favor because they had to come up with a new story every day. And I didn't try to pitch them in any complicated way. I just said I have a good story. So I didn't know what I was doing, but every time I did it, it was working. And if it didn't work, I wasn't worried about it because it was just getting a no. So I just called somebody else. So that system was working for me. When I met Brian, and then I used it for College Pro Painters later. I taught franchisees. I used it in the auto body and the barter, and it was working for every business. And then when Brian and I met, we were in an entrepreneurs organization. We were in a mastermind group together, and we were in Forum. Brian was getting PR for his business. I'm like, how are you doing it? And he goes, I just call people. So we just understood that it wasn't anything complicated. Now, what I've learned since, because when I left 1-800 Got Junk, social media didn't exist. I was the first person at the company to have a Facebook account. It was May of 2007. Everyone was laughing at me for being on Facebook. And so we had nowhere to share all the media stories we were getting. Now, I think of every story that you get, whether it's Oprah or, in a movie or in a newspaper, magazine, whatever, every press story that you get is like a log. So let's say you land 5 stories, you've now got 5 logs and they're all just sitting on a pile. They don't do much. So the story itself doesn't do much. You have to light the logs on fire. So for me, every time I get a press story now, it goes on the media page of my website. So if you go to CameronHerold.com, and it's HEROLD.com, and look at the media page, or if you go to the COOalliance.com and look at the press page, you'll see all the press stories I've been getting. Well, all of those links are huge for SEO. They're also huge for social proof because people see all the press coverage I'm getting. Then I take the link from my page, and I share it 3 times a year on Facebook, 3 times a year on LinkedIn, 5 times on Twitter. And then I also email it out to all the speakers bureaus once a month. I email it to my customers once a quarter. I get my employees to share it on their social feed. So I'm amplifying that story. I'm putting that story out in front of people more. That's kind of how I light the logs on fire. And then I remember when I was 13, we started a little bonfire up in the bush, and one of the kids brought some gasoline, and we poured gasoline on the fire, and that was like, whoa, it's amazing, right? So I think of press as, how do I light my logs on fire, and then how do I pour gas on them? The way you pour gas on them is you buy traffic and you send new people to that page on your website, and then you're retargeting them using AdRoll or Google's remarketing. So now they're getting all the links. So they've seen your ad because you pushed it in front of them, and they're getting retargeting, and you've got all the SEO link backs. So that's how I leverage free PR now, is I call it the digital trifecta, where you have your earned media, your owned media, and your paid media all working together.
That's great. Cameron, one of the clarifying questions I want to ask you, and then we'll wrap up, is most business owners aren't going to need New York Times. They're not going to need national NBC News. They're not going to need anything like that. But some may need more than their local newspaper, and they need some regional coverage. How does that go?
It's exactly the same.
Okay.
You just reach out to them. Now, you can also ladder up the media. So every story you get in the media helps you get more media, right? If I get a small story here, a small story there, it makes you look more credible. So every little story helps you get more stories. Every podcast interview, every blogger, every small newspaper, every church bulletin, whatever, all of those stories on your website being shared, being pushed out, helps you land the next story, the next story. Here, let me give you some examples. Everyone listening right now has at least 4 stories they can get about their business today. The first story is kind of that entrepreneurial, the genesis story, right? It's how you left your crappy job, or you saw something that was needed and you started a business, right? It's the genesis of your business. It inspires people. It educates people. The second story that we all have is our kind of hero's journey. It's that lesson from the edge. It's the overcoming adversity. It's how we struggled. We almost failed. We almost went bankrupt. We had to fire our best friend. We almost lost our marriage because of it. We didn't draw payroll for 6 months. It's all of those struggles, the trials and tribulations, and how we overcame those. And the phoenix rose from the ashes, and it gives hope, and it educates and inspires. We all have that story. We all have a bunch of those stories. The third story is our kind of how we're leveraging technology, apps, any technology hacks, and culture, right? How we're really building that culture inside of whatever. Like people be like, oh, you need to be like a really sexy technology company. Well, we were the #2 company in all of Canada to work for, and we were in garbage. But we were a cult at College Pro Painters. We were painting houses. Like, you talk about, it's as boring as watching paint dry. If we can turn that into a cult and garbage into a cult, you can do it with any business. And then the fourth story is the story about your customer. And it's how your product or your service helped your customer. And it can be done in every single market that you have a customer. So if you've got customers in Boston, you can get a story about helping your customers, and then you can do one in Dallas and one in Houston. Every single market you have a customer, you can get the business journals to write about how your product or service helped that person. So it's really, really easy to get press. And then, you can get bloggers and podcasters and newspapers and magazines and radio and TV coverage. The same story in all these different outlets will cover you as well.
Well, that's where I go back to the metaphor that you gave to the story is the log. Once you have the log, not only do you light the log on fire, but you can also use that log in repurposed areas in multiple different places.
Bingo. Yeah. So you want lots of logs, and then you want to light them on fire by sharing them everywhere. And then you want to pour gas on it by driving people so they see it. Because nobody's going to see that. Like, the fact that we were on Oprah was great for 3 days. But the real power has been the fact that we could talk about being on Oprah for the last 18 years.
Yeah. 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 Like, and it doesn't matter how fresh the story is. You were on Oprah.
And I talk about it. It's in my books. I mention it in press coverage. It's on my website. We've linked to it. I've shared it. Like, that's the power is lighting that log on fire. It's not the story. Anybody who thinks that, oh, if I land an article in the Boston Globe or the New York Times, it's going to change my business. Nope. It'll change your business for 20 minutes. And then everybody will go back to work. But you need to share that story with every prospect. You need to share that story with every potential customer. You need to share that story with every potential employee. You need to get your employees to share that story on their social feed so they feel successful. You have to amplify that message.
Well, and we go back and ask our clients, what's your number one form of marketing? It's referral, word of mouth. And so it sounds like all of that PR just helps to reinforce the word of mouth and the referral aspect of every business as well. Pours gasoline on that. That's good. Yep. Cameron, Herold, take just a second and go back over all of the different things that you have where people can connect with you, learn more about you, read your books, get your stuff and your new course as well.
Yeah. So all of my books are available on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. We've got Double Double, Meetings Suck, The Miracle Morning for Entrepreneurs that I co-authored with Hal Elrod, Vivid Vision, and then Free PR. My Second in Command podcast is one they should all subscribe to and check out, because we interview some amazing COOs of some great brands. We've got the COO of Bumble, Shopify, the Cleveland Indians, lots of really cool brands that we've got the COOs interviewing on. And then my COO Alliance, if anybody is at least 5 million or greater in revenue, they should check that. And then the course, for sure, people should be getting their managers to sign up for the Invest in Your Leaders course. It'll change their game for sure. That's
good. All right. So make sure to go check him out. His dominant homepage is his namesake, Cameron Herold with an O.com. You can go check those things out there. Cameron, thank you so much for spending time.
Hey, Scott, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah.